Hey guys, so as usual, it's time for a very early ban list prediction, and so basically I shared a survey pretty recently, and so 216 players responded, so thank you very much for taking the time to fill out the survey, and also sharing the survey if you did. And definitely make sure to check me out on Twitter so that you don't miss out on any future surveys. So before we continue, big thanks to my sponsors as usual, links and discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Supplies below that you can check out. Now, in terms of the player profile of those who responded to this survey, basically we had over 80% being considered as at least semi-competitive, so that means at least going to local level events, maybe not regionals, but obviously if you're considered competitive, then you are probably consistently going to at least regional level events or even higher. And then you did have a decent chunk in 17% who consider themselves as casual, so basically just playing with friends or maybe just like online tournaments. So let's just start with one of the most controversial cards right now in terms of discussion for ban lists, and that is Eradicator Epidemic Virus, and basically over half predicted that it will get banned on the next list, and so hopefully this actually does happen. I know there's a lot who think it's still okay for it to be around. I mean, this actually has been a problem for about a year now, but essentially when, Power of the Elements came out, you had Sprite and Tier, and basically tier limits at the time, they were kind of going through like the Curious Griffin combo to get also set Eradicator, just really not fun, and now you have something like, let's say, Labyrinth that can kind of tutor this out, but also just a lot of other decks, especially in combination with something like Thrust now. They're going to be able to set this Eradicator, and then just, a lot of decks have Dark 25 under higher monster, which is not that hard, and just being able to blow out spells usually is pretty devastating. So hopefully this does get hit on the next list. And then we have Pot of Prosperity. Honestly, if you were to watch a few of my last ban list prediction videos, essentially I always talk about how Prosperity really should get at least limited. I think it's far too strong. Not only does it improve consistency by a lot, especially this card is something that's usually seen in like very meta decks, right? But on top of that, nowadays there's actually like even additional bonus on top of the consistency booster, is that a deck like a Shira, where you banish certain cards like, let's say, Garura, or like the Infinite Track that can protect the Rise Heart. So just a lot of things that a Rise card can attach and just gain additional effects, and that's just like really strong. And maybe they start with like a semi-limit at some point, and it is also getting reprinted in the 25th century rare set, and so I do think it will definitely be time for this card to finally get hit, because it did come out, Blazing Vortex, that's now at least like a couple of years, so I think it's definitely time for it to get hit in some fashion. And then we have Thrust. So obviously it's a pretty new card, and at this point I don't think it will get hit. I mean, right now it actually provides some form of added ways to actually have a chance going second, because this can certainly add you something like Evenly or Dark Ruler, and your opponent is most likely activating some form of monster effect during that turn when you're going second. And so I think it's a really strong card. Maybe in the future it will definitely be up for conversations in terms of some kind of hit, but I think right now it's okay. And related to Thrust is, of course, Talent, and this card has actually been around for a few years now, right? It actually came out during, I believe, was it Rise of the Duelist? It was like early on in the pandemic days, and so what, even after a few years, when it first got announced, I mean, definitely people were going crazy, because it was essentially, 3 banned cards in one. But even now, I think, no one really expects this card to get banned, or even get limited, or semi-limited rather, and so I think, again, for now, this card is definitely still okay. I think maybe in the future, that conversation kind of changes, but for now, it seems to be okay, and everyone else thinks that way. And then we have Evenly Match, of course. Most people don't think anything will change with this card, and I totally get that. But at the same time, when Lightning Storm got semi-limited last list, that really just came out of nowhere. So I think at this point, nothing's really safe, and so if it did also get semi-limited for some reason, I don't think it would be too surprising, considering what they've done in the past now. And then next we have Anti-Spell Fragments. So, at this point, 75% thinking that there's not going to be any change. It's kind of funny, because, when we are in a format where Anti-Spell is seeing a lot of play, let's say, even date back to like a year ago with, Branded Despia being tier 1, and even earlier, a few months ago, actually, this was also, again, kind of a hot topic, because, let's say, Super Heavy Samurai, they were briefly a tier 1 deck, and Anti-Spell can also completely shut down that pendulum mechanic. And so I think it definitely goes back and forth in terms of, people's opinion of whether this card will get banned or not. I do think that it should just get banned, though. At some point, again, it's just going to historically just come back in terms of meta play. It's certainly not fun, especially when Anti-Spell is paired with something like at least an Omni Negate, which it almost always is in today's game. So hopefully this card does get addressed at some point. And then actually very similar to that logic is D-Barrier. Again, if you were to rewind back like a few months, everyone was saying this card should get banned, right? Including me from that last ban list prediction. But right now, it's not seeing actually that much play. Obviously, something like Labyrinth can tutor it out. And I guess, you know, Thrust is becoming a very popular card right now. And this is certainly one of the things that you can just set after using Thrust. So right now, you know, just kind of like recency, I don't think people are expecting this card to get hit. And Konami has shown that like, for some reason, they just never hit this card. But again, it's similar to the lines of anti-spell, you know, cards that just completely shut down certain game mechanics, key game mechanics. I do think that it should get banned, but whether it actually will, I'm not too sure. And then super polymerization. So this is kind of funny as well because, you know, depending on who you ask, I mean, for example, I play Brandon, so I love this card, but, you know, it's obviously a very unfair card because you just cannot respond to it. This was limited at some point and then slowly started coming back. First got put to 2 rather, and then to 3. And even during the early pandemic days when Shaddoll Invoke was tier 1, or Dogmatica Shaddoll Invoked, I should say, this was definitely saw a lot of uptick in play. And since then, you know, you saw in tiers and now in branded, it's just really strong. I think right now maybe they don't hit it, but I do think at some point this is another card that probably has to go back down to something like 1, especially now that we have a card like Garura that's came out in the last year, which is really crazy good for any deck that plays Super Poly. And then we have Branded Fusion, speaking of branded, and you know, I thought this was kind of interesting that essentially a little over half thought that this card would get limited or semi-limited, so essentially at least some kind of hit. And you know, I kind of understand it. Obviously in the OCG they definitely have hit branded quite hard actually in terms of Branded Fusion and Luber or opening, or maybe both, I can't remember. No, to me though, and I get it, I'm a branded player, but at the same time I'm not like some hardcore branded lover or anything. And to me, I think, you know, if you can address like the monsters that lock, and I'll kind of get to that shortly later in this video, if you can kind of address those issues, I think Branded is actually a pretty fair deck. Because if you actually play Branded, you're going to quickly come to realize it's actually a pretty fragile deck. And I think right now, it's not really right to hit Branded Fusion, but you know, at the same time in the future, it's just bound to be, you know, Konami's gonna make some busted ass card that you can dump off Branded Fusion, and at that point I'm sure there's gonna be better conversation to limit it. I think for now it's actually okay, but that's just my opinion. And then speaking of those monsters that lock, Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, obviously, you know, this card really should not exist, or at least a way to get this onto your opponent's field should not exist. 38% predicting you get banned. Obviously, we had some discussions with, you know, this versus Expulsion on the last prediction, and Expulsion ultimately got banned. And you know what? Rightfully so, it was very easy to get this Gimmick lock going. Even right now, it's still fairly easy with Sanctifier. And, you know, the problem with banning this card is that there's still just too many monsters that lock. You know, Ido would probably be the next best one because it's still a level 6 Dark, so you can dump off Granule, which is kind of like a key priority for that kind of lock. And so I think sure you can ban this, but I think at that point then you have so many other monsters that lock that you have to ban. Let's just, you know, such as the Disciple Raw, and there's also that one DD monster, so probably in my view not the best one to hit. And so instead, I actually put this Sanctifier Dragon on here because, you know, most people did not think anything would change about this card, and I get it. But to me, I think you should actually ban this card in Branded because, you know, then that addresses any kind of monsters that lock, because without having to, you know, ban all of them separately. And so I get it, it's a new card. But you know what, at the same time, Super Heavy Scarecrow, like that was a new card too, and they banned it in 3 weeks because it was really busted. And maybe it's not as crazy as that card in that deck with Sanctifier, but at the same time, you know, it's really strong. Not only can you not target it, which makes, you know, stopping that lock pretty difficult as well. It also cannot be fusion summon, so you basically cannot, or rather I should say you cannot fuse with it, so basically you cannot even super poly it away, so it's really strong. And I think if they want to address like the lock, then you just have to ban Sanctifier instead. And then we're going to move on to the sprite cards, and you know, quite a lot think that this card will get limited or semi-limited, you know, like over 60%, and I get it, but at the same time, you know, Konami has consistently made these like slap on the wrist consistency hit with sprite, other than the elf band, that was definitely big, but you know, I've been saying this the last list and the last list before that, I don't think these small consistency hit with sprite, you know, I don't think they work. The engine is far too good, and it's definitely, they can keep showing that they're very resilient. So if you're gonna hit sprite, you would have to just like ban something that's like really key, and we'll get to that shortly, but I don't think if they do another consistent hit, I think at that point they just know that Sprite's still going to be pretty alive. I just put Sprite Jet on here, and you know what? Quarter people think it will get limited because OCG actually limited this card, and I remember when that came out. It was around YCS Niagara, which is basically September of last year, so almost a year ago. So really, you know, this was kind of like the hit. I can't remember if they also hit starter at the same time, and so I kind of get it. You know, Sprite Jet can get you like the starter or like the double cross or the smasher. Those are very good cards, but probably won't get hit here. You're probably either hitting blue or some of the extra deck monsters. And speaking of those, I also put, you know, Gigantic Sprite. Most people don't think it will get changed. I think if you want to hit Sprite, and if it depends on Konami's view, obviously, if they actually want to move away from Sprite and think that it's definitely had its time, you just ban one of the extra deck monsters in Gigantic Sprite, or let's say with Sprint, because they're very, very good cards. And really, you know, as I said, those small consistent hits they don't seem to be working. Like no matter what, Sprite still continues to be like a tier 1 deck, or at least some form of Sprite variant. And so Sprint is definitely another kind of key one as well. Obviously after the Elf Band, this is the best extra deck Sprite monster, arguably. And it's very easy to go into a lot of decks, and you know, like Nimble Angler Dump, bring 2 bodies with Nimble Beavers, really gets things going. So you know what, something to consider if you were to outright kill Sprite. And then moving on to the cashier cards, of course, Fenrir is more of a generic staple that can be played in a lot of different decks. I think a lot of people predicted this card would get limited on that last list, but it did not. And, you know, Cashier only got like a slap on the wrist. And I think it's time for another decent hit to the cashier cards. And so Fenrir to 1 makes a lot of sense. Maybe even semi-limit. They did semi-limit Unicorn, so maybe that's how they start with Fenrir as well. Definitely sees a lot of play in decks outside of Cashier, so it makes sense to at least do some kind of hit. I also put Theosis on here. Don't get me wrong, it's a good card, but I think among the cashier cards right now, it's probably like one of the more least discussed cards in terms of any kind of changes. I think it's fair that it stays at 3. At the same time, Rebirth, though, I think this card definitely should get hit. A lot of people thinking that it will get put to 1. And, you know, last prediction, I kind of said, well, you know what, if you hit enough cashier names, maybe Rebirth won't be a problem. But considering that they are still keeping the cashier names, I think Rebirth definitely does need to get hit because, you know, banishing things face down is really not like a fun mechanic, and this thing being able to do that as well on top of 2 other really good effects, I think it's far too strong and probably does have to get hit. And then kind of similar to Cashier is Shifter. Hopefully this card finally gets hit. In the OCG, I believe it's at 2, which is honestly, I would take that too. I mean, 30% thinking it will get banned. Another 29% thinking it will be limited or semi-limited. Obviously, Konami has shown that they clearly love this card and they want to keep it in play. I just think it's problematic that, you know, nowadays tier 1 decks are running it, right? So you have something like Ashira, and like, you know, the year and a half prior to that, like you had Flunder being able to play this card really well optimally. And, you know, this is a card that essentially usually destroys most other strategies out there. And previously, you know, when it was only rogue decks that were playing it, let's say like Red Maju, then it was okay, right? Like, sure, you know, give them a win condition. But now when you have tier 1 decks being able to run it, and not only that, play optimally under it, I think it's like far too strong, and hopefully it does get hit. They did limit Gamma, so now that actually gives me hope that they're willing to hit other hand traps. And then we have Ibli. You know, it's kind of weird in terms of play. It's not really seeing that much play, but there were definitely some topping lists that were playing it in terms of Sprite or Kashira. I suspect, you know, they're probably most likely hitting Kashira and Sprite again further in this next list. So at that point, they probably won't ban Ibli because those are kind of like the best, or rather like the top offenders in terms of using Ibli. So maybe it stays for now. But you know what? I think in the future, at some point, maybe this conversation comes back again. And then we have Magnemite. So now, you know, Dragon Link has been increasing a lot in terms of play and representation and top cut. And of course, Magnemite is one of the best cards in that deck. And also a lot of people's side decks as well. You've been seeing that in, like, let's say my YCS top cut breakdowns of the most played hand traps and staples. Magnemite, it's kind of weird situation though, because against certain strategies, let's say like Branded or Labyrinth or even, you know, Math Mech, Bestials are very good, but then you have other key strategies right now, let's say like Rika, as well as Flunder's definitely a very solid contender, and you know, this card doesn't do anything. At the same time, looks like a lot of people actually predict this card to get limited. Definitely something that a lot of people thought would get limited during that tier 0 Shizu format, just because this card was so good, the Bestials in general. Maybe it's time to finally for this card to go. I think in the OCG it got put to 1, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but just being able to also add another Bestial, whether from deck or grave, so you can still play around roll if you have another Bestial in the grave. I think it's really strong and probably will get hit at least at some point in the future. Now, considering that Dragon Link has been on a tear lately, I also decided to put Chaos Space on here in terms of the survey questions. And you know what? Almost everyone thinks that it will just stay the same, and perhaps that's fair. You know, at least there's not much Gamma going around because it's only at 1, so at least when you Ash Chaos Space, it's probably safe and you don't get punished with the Gamma. So maybe that's one of the reasons why Chaos Space people predict it will still stay. And then on to some runic cards. So runic tip, you know, over half predicting that it would get limited. I mean, a lot of people predicted that as well on the last list, but instead Konami decided to only semi-limit the fountain, which really did not do much at all. This is definitely the best runic spell card outside of the fountain, so probably should get a hit. You know, just being able to draw a lot is something that Konami typically does not like and has shown historically that they will limit them for the most part, and so this card will probably get hit. Now you also have Hugin, which of course is another solid card. It's definitely something that gets you the fountain, so you know, limiting it, does it do anything? Like, yeah, sure, I guess so in terms of grind game, but you know, realistically this card can also go back to the extra deck when you try to remove it. So I think really you should just focus the hits on like the tip as well as the fountain. And then I put some big welcome and as well as welcome labyrinth on here. You know, for the most part, people do not expect any changes to these cards, and I think that's fair. I think if you can just address some of those problematic traps, right, like Eradicator as well as maybe even D-Barrier and Skill Drain also, we'll talk shortly about that. You know, those kind of problematic floodgate kind of cards, if you can address that, I think Labyrinth, these cards can probably stay. And you know what, while most people do not like back row decks, at least there's some kind of, you know, meta relevant back row deck right now, which is kind of hard to say in most formats. And then there were some other potential hits that people could provide in free text form in the survey, and the first one of course is Skill Drain, which I definitely should have put it on there myself. I don't know why they put it to 3. I think I'm gonna assume Konami just felt that they should you know, put it to 3 because to make Labyrinth stronger, and not necessarily because they actually thought Skill Drain at 3 would be okay, because it's definitely not okay. This card hopefully goes back to 1 where it belongs. And then interestingly, there were people that thought maybe Droll and Lockbird will get banned. I don't think so, at least not right now. You know, we're actually about to enter like a Droll format, next format when Dune releases, and you know, I don't like Droll formats either, but at the same time, for now, like, we really need this just to be able to at least have a chance going second against some of the strategies that add and draw a lot. I think at some point, if Konami can somehow figure out and make the meta decks, you know, not draw and search so much, then maybe Droll can finally go away. But until then, which probably will take a while, I think this card has to stay. And then moving on to the limited and semi-limited section, we have Call by the Grave. It's always a conversation in terms of whether it should get banned or just come back right to 3. Most people at this point just predict it will just stay at 1. It actually does not see as much play as it did even, like, let's say a year and a half ago. It's still in some decks, you know, obviously a deck like, let's say Branded, like they really need Branded Fusion to resolve, and Ash, they are probably playing it, but you know, a lot of decks are not actually running this anymore. And then we have Feather Duster. I kind of put this on here because, you know what, while a lot of people are arguing for Eradicator for what it can do to blow out, you know, hands in terms of spells or traps, now, you know, you kind of saw actually something similar with like Feather Duster in the European WCQ and just blowing out 5 back row. It was definitely interesting when they initially limited this a couple years ago. I was really surprised. And you know what, I think, you know, most people don't think there will be any changes, but considering that they also semi-limited Lightning Storm, perhaps, you know, they do also go back to like banning this card and kind of reducing the number of blowout cards. And then we also have Gazelle. I have no idea why this is still at 1. Honestly, most people predict it will get changed. They probably like start with the semi-limit as they usually do with a lot of different cards. But you know what? You could probably just put this right to 3 and it won't really matter. I'm going to assume, I'm not sure when the new Salat support comes out, which by the way, I heard it sucks anyways. But I'm going to assume maybe around that time they will try to time it and then just kind of increase the hype, I guess, for the product. I'm sure this card will come back to 3 at some point. And then we have Misk, definitely not a card that I don't think will come back to 3 at some point, but maybe to 2. But you know, most people do think that it will stay at 1. Obviously, we just recently got some Dyna support, and you know, considering that Misk did not come back on the ban list with that support that came out, I don't think this card is going to change anytime soon, at least for now. And then we also have Pot of Desires. You know, I think at this point, a lot of people sort of just kind of got accustomed to being at 2. This was a really weird one. I remember when they first limited it, it was really out of the blue. And then right after that, they actually changed it to 2, which again is not too usual. And so I think for now, again, Konami seems to not like draw cards, so maybe they just keep it at 2. I don't think they're going to go back to 1 anymore just because they already did that and change your mind right away. So maybe they're just going to stay with this for now and be safe. And then speaking of a card that just recently went to 2 that was also kind of out of the blue is Lightning Storm. So, they did recently change it, so it's probably not going to change again, but you know what, you never know. Like I said with Potted Desires, they did change it right after the next list. Lightning Storm to 2 probably will stay for now. I think, it's definitely a good card, a very big blowout, but it's kind of weird that they would semi-limit this but not evenly match when evenly match is actually a better card, but you know what, who knows. And then we have some more archetype specific cards. Sprite Starter, it's at 2 right now. It's a card that a lot of people thought would just go to 1 for the last list. They obviously only put it to 2. And like I mentioned earlier, all these like small consistency hits to Sprite, I don't think it's doing that much. I think it's either Konami just decides to just keep it the way it is for Sprite, or they decide to just, destroy it and kill it and just ban one of their extra deck monsters. And then we were talking about runic cards previously. They put it to 2. It really did not do anything. There were a lot of lists that were playing 2 anyways with the runic engine. And so this card far too strong. Being able to not only play all of your runic quick play spells from hand, but also being able to draw 3 on like your opponent's turn, your turn. Just absolutely insane. Maybe it will actually get limited because once you get rid of it one time, then the runic stuff gets really bad. So I'm not too sure how they're gonna approach this. But hopefully we do see some kind of change. And then we also have Unicorn, which of course recently got semi-limited. Obviously a very small hit to cashier on that last list. They're probably going to have to hit them again. Are they going to absolutely kill them off? I'm not too sure, honestly. They probably, might keep it alive for quite a bit longer. Unicorn, though, if they are going to keep it longer, probably has to go to 1 or something because it's, on its own is just so strong. And then some other potential limited, semi-limited cards that people mentioned. They really thought Engage will go back to 3. I don't think so. I'm honestly genuinely shocked that it came back to 2. Although I guess to be fair, I think Sky Striker in terms of performance has been rather disappointing since Engage came to 2. Obviously, it did top the North American Remote Duel YCS with Dylan Fricker. You can certainly check that profile out on my channel. But other than that, I don't think it's had any kind of premier level tops or even like regional level tops. I think it's been rather scarce. And then we also have Herald of the Orange Light. I think this makes sense to honestly just go back to 3. Originally, it was limited in that random December ban list that came out during that Tier 0 format, which some could consider as an emergency ban list because it came out pretty fast compared to the one prior to that. And Orange got limited there because of, along with the Shizu cards, it was like very crazy good. Now, obviously, all the Shizu cards have been limited, and this card really probably can just go back and then, it kind of gives Drytron a buff, which really is not seeing that much play anyways. And then onto the ban cards, of course. I always put pretty much like the same cards on this section every time I do these surveys. And you know what? At least Blaster actually finally came off the list and kind of graduated from this ban section. But something that's definitely not going to graduate is Max C. This card is not coming back. 96% thinking that it will stay banned. Good. I don't think it's good if this were to come back in the TCG. So hopefully it stays that way. Next we have Harp Horror, and you know what, I would be interested if I just sort of plot out all my previous banlist prediction surveys I've been doing the last year or two and just see how the percentage looked like for Harp Horror, just because I feel like people probably have lost hope as the time went on because it's just not coming back. I'm not too sure. I mean, maybe they're kind of worried about either current or in the future any kind of graveyard related strategies, and maybe it makes it too strong with any kind of Orcas variant. It was definitely pretty strong back in its tier 1 days, especially in combination with like the striker cards, so I'm not quite sure what will happen with Harp. But maybe it does come back. And then we have Colossus. This card probably is not coming back, at least not right now. Just kind of like a big floodgate, and it's kind of hard to out, and you're just not being able to search. And today's game, there's just too much searching going on that I don't think Konami would want to bring this back in, but who knows. And then next we have Electromite, of course. At this point, I think it's probably fine for it to come back to 1. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, though, if I'm missing something. I used to play Pendulums quite a lot, actually, but I stopped basically after Electromite got banned. And so, I think it's obviously a card that definitely should not be at more than 1. It's really strong link 2 for any Pendulum deck. I'm not sure how it's going to fare if it actually came back, but clearly Konami has not shown that they want to bring it back, at least not yet, but hopefully so. And then we have Zen Mighty. Honestly, I did not play around this time, so I actually wouldn't be able to really comment too much on this. It's definitely someone let me know in the comments if they think that nothing would change if this card were to come back. And then we have Masterpiece. So it's funny because, the last prediction for the last list, people were saying, what, if like Pearly Noir can exist, why can't Masterpiece? Which was kind of fair point, I guess, but then at the same time, I guess, Konami like hit Pearly right away within 3 weeks, making it very difficult to go into Noir, so maybe they don't like, unoutable like boss monsters essentially, so maybe Masterpiece still stays. True Draco, definitely do not want to see that as a meta deck ever. It's definitely a very toxic strategy, so I think for now this card will probably stay banned. And then some other currently banned cards that people thought maybe could be released, you know, Glow Bulb as well as MX Saber Invoker. I, again, did not play around this time, so I don't know anything about X Sabers. I'm not sure what would change if this were to come back. As for Prank Kids Meow Meow Mew, though, I definitely do not think this card can come back right now, especially when the adventure token stuff, while admittedly right now it's not seeing that much play anymore, but if the Prank Kids stuff, Meow Meow Mew were to come back, then it would, and that was very, very strong, like one card combo deck, along with the adventure token stuff. It was very, very strong, and so I think, you know, don't get me wrong, I think this card will come back at some point in the future. It's just something has to be addressed with the adventures token stuff, or any other future packages that might also supplement in the same way. That would have to get addressed before this card comes back, because I do feel bad for Prank Kid players. They finally got their dream Link 1, because otherwise the deck is pretty bricky. So hopefully this card can come back for them. In terms of satisfaction of the current format, you know what? It's actually looking decently fine. Essentially around half are being at least satisfied or very satisfied. So this is at least better than the last time I did the balance prediction survey. So at least people are not having a miserable time right now. Although with all the monsters, or all the decks rather, that can do some form of lock, it's definitely not very fun. At least compared to the previous format, which is basically just when Pearly and Super Heavy Samurai were briefly tier 1. But I mean, realistically, it wasn't too much different in terms of format, because you still had some of the top decks, and, you know, because Share was still being the best deck, you still had something like Labyrinth as well as Branded. And at least compared to that, a lot of people do agree, or strongly agree, that it is better than that format, because, you know, let's be real, like the Super Heavy Samurai, like crazy one card combos with all the different hand traps they could play, not really fun to play against, especially when they put out something like, you know, Barkion or like Spell Cancer. That was definitely devastating. And Pearly also with, you know, Delicious at 3, like that Noir was really hard to out. And then next, in terms of, you know, when the next ban list would be released, I guess, you know, I don't think it would come out in July either. Maybe August, but we do have Worlds coming, so it would have to definitely be after that, I think. But in September, we do have a slate of some YCSs happening, so it's either they have to, you know, release it a little bit before that to give people enough time to actually buy the cards, or they just wait until all of that ends, especially with like the Megatins coming out. Alright, so that was a very long video, but hopefully you found that interesting and fun to watch in terms of ban list predictions. Obviously, it's still pretty early. I look forward to do my own ban list prediction sometime in the next month. And certainly, big thanks to all of you for watching. A big thanks to my Patreons, as always, for supporting the channel. I will definitely have the data file with all the survey responses available for the Patreons. And, well, take care, guys.